All right, you guys ready to do some notes? I know you are. I know you are. We're in chapter 18. Let's review yesterday just real fast, all right? There were 5 different areas of conflict: East and West Europe, North Africa, uh, Soviet Union, Russia, and also the Pacific. Now, when we left off yesterday, President Roosevelt had just ordered that Commander General Douglas MacArthur return, leave the Philippines, because they thought that he might get captured, and they obviously didn't want that. MacArthur famously says, "I will return. I'll be back." He promises his men, and he did come back. And the president makes him the supreme Allied commander in all of the Pacific. And MacArthur returns and begins to win victory after victory. Remember, they found out the secret plan of the Japanese to attack Midway, and they stopped that, and they won the battle there. And the American pilots were able to sink several Japanese aircraft carriers and forcing the Japanese to retreat. So today, that brings us up to today. What happened next? Today, we're going to talk about the major turning points in the war. Up until this point, Germany had really been on the offensive. But now the momentum's going to swing. And it's primarily due to Eisenhower, Dwight Eisenhower. Dwight Eisenhower leads some troops into North Africa, and he defeats the Axis forces there within a year. And in 1943, Eisenhower leads a force of allies of 160,000 men invading Sicily off the island of Italy, and they win major victories there. June 6th of 1944, the Allies launch a massive invasion of France along a 50-mile front on 5 different beaches. 175,000 men landed and established a beachhead on the first day. In other words, they got off their boats, landed, drove back the enemy, and they maintained this position. That is known as D-Day. All right. Now, Dwight Eisenhower is leading many of these attacks. Now we're coming up on the choice. For Harry S. Truman has to make a choice. Do we use atomic bombs on Japan? And it's not a very easy decision for him to make. You can imagine what's going through his mind at this time. The book talks about the conclusion of the war. All right, how did the war end? One of the things that really turned the tide of the war was the Battle of the Bulge. Remember, this is where Hitler tried to make an attack and flank the Allies, get around the Allies, and he failed. He failed miserably. It's known as the Battle of the Bulge. The Germans had really had the Allies pinned for a while, and they led this advance. In the spring of 1945, the Allies just waited outside of Berlin and allowed the Russians to fight their way through Germany's capital all the way from the east. And on May 7th, the Germans unconditionally surrendered. In other words, they said, "We totally give up." And the Allies declared victory in Europe, VE Day, on May 8th, 1945. The Germans totally surrendered. They were just totally overwhelmed. So that's the victory in Europe. Now, what's happening in Japan? Japan's a little different story. In April 1945, President Roosevelt unfortunately passes away. His vice president was a man named Harry Truman. Harry Truman becomes the next president of the United States. Bad timing for him because he has to make this decision. It's up to him and the Allies, but primarily the United States. So in the summer of 1945, the Allied leaders met in Potsdam, Germany, to discuss how they're going to end this war. And Truman stands up and he decides that he will order an atomic bomb attack on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. It was August the 6th. They say the blast destroyed nearly 5 square miles of the city immediately, and it killed an estimated 70,000 people just like that. Another 70,000 people suffered terrible injuries from the blast. In other words, they weren't killed outright, but they died within weeks and months or days from the blast. Truman again demanded after this bomb that the Japanese surrender. Remember, the Allies had asked the Japanese to surrender multiple times. So after the bomb was dropped, they asked the Japanese to surrender one more time. The Japanese refused. The leaders refused. So in response to that, on August the 9th, another American bomber dropped a second atomic bomb on a city called Nagasaki. This blast immediately killed about 40,000 people, with another 40,000 people injured, dying from their injuries. So terrible, terrible choice that he had to make. And then just a few days after that, on August 14th, the Japanese finally surrender. Their only request was that their emperor, Hirohito, be allowed to retain his position. In other words, that he can still be emperor. And that was on September the 2nd, 1945. And that's known as VJ Day, Victory in Japan. All right, so that sums up our notes for today. Go on and do the rest of the lesson, and I will see you at the end.